You've probably heard that the best edits are the ones you don't notice, but I'm here to tell you that's not always true, especially when you're trying to evoke an emotion. My name is Austen Menges, and I've been a pro editor for over 20 years with a focus on broadcast TV commercials with budgets of $100,000 and higher. Today, I'd like to invite you into my edit suite so I can share a unique exercise that will help you practice an important concept that you can start adding to your own edits today. So editing is not just about seamlessly connecting shots, it's about adding contrast between them. So today I'm going to teach you 5 different ways to add contrast to your edits. And please watch all the way to the end because the last lesson is the most important one of all, and it actually applies to all 5 of these examples. For this exercise, I'm using footage, sound effects, and music, all from Artlist, and I'm going to leave a link below so you can check it out and follow along. You can even download the assets when you're on a free trial. Yours will just be watermarked. And to start, let's watch the whole short sequence that I put together to illustrate all of these concepts. The first type of contrast I want to teach you is sound related. I get the chance to critique a lot of edits, and here's a problem I see a lot. An editor might finish their visual edit, and then for sound design, they only add in a couple of sounds for the whole piece. Like for this, for instance, they might pick a forest ambiance since the dirt bike rider is riding through the forest or the woods. And they might pick a motorcycle or dirt bike sound that's kind of long enough to fit under the whole edit. But in my opinion, a more effective way to work on sound design, and it's a way that creates a wonderful contrast, is to think about it like this. Next time you're working on your sound design, think about finding a different sound for each shot. And when you hard cut between the visuals, also hard cut between the sounds. So there's this contrast, new shot, new sound, contrast, new shot, new sound, contrast. So I'm going to mute the music so you guys can hear the sound design a little better. And I want to play through the sequence and identify when I've used this type of contrast. Okay, so that first shot was about footsteps, and you will see them here. It is 3 footsteps I've added. And the second sound was about a bird cooing. I think that's a dove. I don't know if there's doves in this part of the forest, but I thought it sounded right. It doesn't always have to make perfect sense. And then the next shot was about the motorcycle starting. Okay, I did start the sound of the motorcycle turning on before I cut to the close-up. That's known as a sound advanced cut, where you hear the sound before you cut to the next shot. It does create a nice seamless transition. So let's keep going. Now this was a hard cut shift in the sound design. So you'll see I go from this motorbike sound to this one, and it changes right on the edit. And I also have this dirt and debris sound. So this is a perfect example of what I wanted to illustrate. Now this shot was about birds again, a different type of birds here. And then I started this long whoosh, which was sort of the sound of this shot. Now here's one of the biggest uses of this sound contrast that I've been trying to explain, because there's also a contrast in the loudness of the sounds. But you'll see when we go to this dynamic shot of the motorbike riding by the camera, I have this, it's actually a rally car sound come on right at that hard cut. Let's watch that again. So this next shot was about the bike revving, So it's this rev happening right here. I did advance it before the edit, so it's not exactly a hard cut like some of the others. And then this is probably the biggest sound design contrast I added, where we go from this revving bike to this quiet moment as we see the bike riding through the trees. Okay, now there is a really nice hard cut right here, and this is actually the same sound effect, I believe. I just moved to a different part of it here and made a hard cut so you can sort of hear the shift, the contrast. This carries through these two shots, but then I have another shift happen here. And then I have this final whoosh at the end, and I end with more birds. By the way, if you like content like this, you should download my free editing guide at the link below. It's already helped thousands of editors. Now let's talk about music. Now, when I started as an editor, I remember doing something like this. I would kind of finish my visual edit, and then I would do a music search, and I really spent a lot of time trying to find a vibe in the music that worked with the visuals, and then I would pick my track and I would lay it under the whole edit and I would call it done. So while I did try to pick a song that really matched the visuals, I wouldn't do much to it until later in my career when I realized music offered up one of the biggest opportunities to add contrast to my edits. And that's what I want to show you today. What you can do with music, or one of the most powerful ways to use music, is to go from music to no music, meaning the music stops, or to go from no music to music, where the music turns on. And I have an example of both in the last half of this sequence. Okay, a big difference, right? That drop out in the music creates such a big contrast that it does evoke an emotion. And we have the quiet and loud contrast as well. And then when the music comes on, when that tire of the motorcycle hits the ground, it's really kind of a fun, energetic emotion that's evoked, at least when I watch it. And then you'll also notice the music edit at the end. Instead of just allowing the music to fade out, I actually chose a part of the music that felt like an ending, and I made a music edit. So the music ends when the piece ends, and that makes a big difference as well. I know that's not quite about contrast, but that's just a bonus tip I wanted to include as I was looking at it here. So next time you're going to edit your music for a piece, ask yourself, is there an emotion I'm trying to evoke in this piece? And one of the best tools in your tool belt should be manipulating that piece of music. And to make the biggest contrast for the biggest emotional impact, you're going to want to go from music to no music in a matter of frames, like I did here, or from no music to music. So think about that and give it a try on your next edit. Now let's shift from the soundtrack to the visuals. And one of my favorite ways to add contrast to the visual edits of a piece is through rhythmic contrast. In other words, changing how quickly I'm cutting in between shots or how long I'm staying on shots. Another way to talk about it is tempo, and we can measure tempo in cuts per minute. So let's say I'm making 10 cuts per minute on average, and then I switch to 5 cuts per minute on average. Well, you're going from a fast tempo to a slow tempo. You can also do the opposite, where you're going from a really slow tempo to a fast tempo. And I've color-coded my visual edits here so you can get a real sense of how long I'm staying on each shot. So at the beginning, I have one, two, three, 4 shots in this amount of time. These are all about the same length, so that's establishing a sort of rhythm in those first 3 shots. And then I slow it down. Look how long the next 3 shots are. And that brings us to what I think is the biggest point of rhythmic contrast. Because look how long these 3 shots are. And then I have 1, 2, 3, 4 shots happen in roughly the same amount of time I had 2 shots happen. So I start editing, I start making cuts about twice as fast. And then coming out of it on the other side, I go from 1, 2, 3, 4 shots. And in about the same amount of time, I have another 2 shots. This shot in particular is very long. So let's watch through this part of the edit and see if you can feel, now that you've seen it, if you can feel the impact of the rhythm of the visuals changing. So that's a great way to add contrast to your edits. Think about establishing a rhythm or tempo and then changing it. And you don't have to change it as much as I did here. You could change it less, and that would be less of a contrast and maybe less of an impact. Or you could go even more extreme. Imagine if I had these 2 shots and they stayed about the same length, but instead of 4 shots in this span, what if I had 8? How would that make you feel? Those are the tricks you can use when you have this technique in your tool belt to elicit emotion. Let's shift back to the soundtrack here, and I'm going to show you another way I love adding contrast to my edits using sound design. So we already talked about trying to find a different sound for most of the shots, and then as you hard cut between the visuals, you can actually also hard cut between the sounds. Well, going a level deeper, it's not just about hard cutting between the sounds, but it's about how different are those sounds. You can go from quiet sounds to loud sounds, or you can go from different types of sounds, like a motorcycle revving to a quiet forest. And that's what I did here. When the music drops out, we go from a high revving motorcycle sound and we hard cut to a very quiet forest ambiance. So let's take a look and listen to that section. So not only did I hard cut between the sounds, but the sounds themselves had a major contrast. We go from a motorbike, which is a mechanical sound, it's loud, to a beautiful serene forest. And cutting between those 2 types of sounds makes an impact. And I did also do that. Well, at the beginning, we go from forest and footsteps to a motorbike turning on, which has a nice effect. And then this edit, I went from a quiet moment on the slow-mo of the bike going around this corner here to when we hit the normal speed fast bike zooming by in the next shot. And in my opinion, that creates a great effect, and it's something that you can start adding to your edits. Now, I want to talk about one other sound contrast that I utilized, and it requires a little bit of extra work beyond picking the right sounds. This is called a perspective shift. So when I'm talking about perspective, I'm talking about where the sounds feel like they're coming from. Because there's a big difference of what a motorcycle sounds like, for instance, if I'm riding it or if I'm listening to a motorcycle driving by 100 yards away. Now, to shift the sound perspective, you might have to find a different kind of sound, but you can also use mixing techniques to kind of change the perspective. And there was one place in particular I used this technique, and it was between these two shots right here. And basically, I go from a more present motorcycle sound effect, which is this, and then I cut to debris and dirt flying around and a different motorcycle sound effect. And I actually put some reverb on these two sounds to make them sound like a different perspective. And then I also slowed them down, which changes kind of the feeling of the sound. So let's listen to that. It's pretty subtle, but it does add a contrast, and I could have gone even further with that. So as you're hard cutting between sounds, you might also think about perspective. Now let's go back to visuals, and I want to share a few ways I was thinking about contrast as I was creating this edit. And one quick caveat is not all of these types of contrast are created equal, and you can certainly implement some of these less intense types of contrast in your edit just to build interest, and it won't necessarily make your edit any less seamless. And I'd say these are in that category. So let me talk about the visual language of film to start a little bit. Often we think about, as editors, going from a wide shot to a medium shot to a close-up. That's sort of the visual language to go in that order. So you might see scenes where things start far away and get closer little by little. Or you might start really close on something like a close-up, go out to a medium shot, and then get wide. So kind of going in that order. So one way to add contrast to your edit is to skip that middle shot. So go from a really wide shot to a close-up, or go from a close-up to a really wide shot. That's a subtle way to add some contrast. And I did that here. I went from, this is a relatively wide shot. It shows the whole motorbike in frame. And then I cut to this close-up of the guy in his helmet. I left in this alternate shot of a medium shot, which might be kind of a more standard way to cut, where it goes from him getting on the bike to a little bit closer than him riding around. But I chose a more extreme punch-in to add more contrast. I think that works nicely. Now, some other things I had access to with this footage in particular is I was able to use slow-mo footage and cut that with normal speed footage. And here's a good example of that. So that's a pretty powerful contrast to go from a slow-mo shot of a dirt bike to a full speed shot of a dirt bike. You might even want to speed that full speed shot up a little to increase the contrast. And then another thing I had access to, which you might as well, depending on what you're working on, is going from a static shot to a handheld shot. And right in the first two shots, I have a type of visual contrast because I start with this handheld shot and I cut to an almost static shot or two. Let's check it out. And those are some great ways, if you have the options in your footage, to add visual contrast to your edits. At the beginning of the video, I mentioned that a lot of people will tell you that most good edits are invisible, and there's certainly a case to be made for that, but I think I proved here that there's a wonderful place for adding friction and contrast to your edits when you need to make a powerful impact. And so the point I want you to take away from this is only use contrast as you need to in your edits to evoke an emotion. You think about what emotion you're trying to evoke in your audience, say in the opening 5 seconds of the piece you're working on. And you say, oh, I want to evoke this emotion. What are the tools in my editing tool belt that I can use to get that emotion? And if contrast comes to mind, then by all means, use contrast. Use as many or as few of these examples as you need to get at that emotion. And that's really what's going to make you go to the next level as an editor, is editing with intention. And not just taking these techniques and kind of sprinkling them through your edits, but using them with that intentional, deliberate mindset to evoke emotion in your audience. So do that and you'll be in the top 1% of editors. Remember, you can check out my free editing guide at the link below. And if you want to fast track your editing progress, also check out my editing course. My students are improving rapidly by working on real-world projects with actual personal feedback from me. And I want to end with one more question. Have you ever felt stuck as a video editor? If so, then I created this next video just for you. Happy editing.